Welcome to Season 2 of the Robertson and Easterling podcast. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Matt Easterling.
And I'm Craig Robertson. Matt and I are board-certified family law specialists who have put together one of the brightest group of attorneys in Mississippi, specializing in divorce and other family conflict.
In this season of the podcast, you'll hear from more real people discussing the most difficult season of their lives. We will also introduce you to more of our network of professionals who help hurting people in the healing process.
So now, once again, sit back, relax, take a deep breath. Everything is going to be okay. You found us, and what you're about to hear is going to help. Welcome to today's show. I'm excited to introduce our guest today. We have Kelly Engelmann of Enhanced Wellness Living with us today. And those of you who have listened to the podcast in the past know that at Robertson and Easterling, we have a real goal and objective of providing our clients with holistic services and to try to sit with somebody and meet with somebody right where they are. And you can't do that well without thinking about their health and wellness. And so Kelly is here to talk with us about that today. Kelly, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm super jazzed to be here. You know, anytime that I can step in and speak to people about their next step in their wellness journey. So for you guys listening, please lean in. We'll talk about, you know, where you are in your health journey and what are the next steps maybe that will be the most impactful for you. So anytime I get an opportunity to do that, I just love it. So thanks for having me.
Well, the first thing I want to talk to you a little bit about is this concept of a food-first approach to wellness. Matt and I love food.
Who doesn't?
I love it too much, I think.
But a food-first approach to wellness, explain to us and our listeners what that means.
What that means, yeah. So that's one of my little taglines because, you know, I got into the functional medicine space after having been in conventional medicine, which was fee-for-service. So you would see a patient, you would talk to them about their health issues, and you would prescribe something, typically a medication, and they would be on their way. And that can help, but it can only get you so far. And so what my patients taught me over time is without really focusing on some foundational things like nutrition and food, you can only get so far with your health and wellness. And so when I developed my functional wellness practice, Enhanced Wellness Living, I decided to explore that whole concept of food first and what that would look like for a patient. And I'll be honest, I was blown away at the results. The difference between having, you know, one or two modalities that you can implement versus layering nutrition first with those other aspects on top of that, the results are just unbelievable.
So, I mean, in your experience, what percentage of the population is not implementing a proper diet?
Oh gosh, a huge portion of the population. If you look at our obesity rates in the state of Mississippi, they're over 37%. And that's obesity. That's 30 pounds over your ideal body weight or 30% body fat, 77% overweight. Okay. So that tells me that we're overfed, but we're undernourished. Right. So there's certain nutrients that, don't want to get too technical, but there's certain nutrients that are considered anti-nutrients, like sugar. So sugar is very nutritionally expensive for the body. You eat sugar and then you use up all your minerals to outprocess that sugar. So you've just leached your body from valuable minerals that it could be using to drive some key metabolic pathways for hormone balance and energy and vitality.
Let's back up just a little bit, Kelly, because this is just fascinating, and I know we could spend the whole time talking about these concepts, but tell the listener a little bit about your story and how you even got started in this, in the medical field to begin with.
Yeah, so my story, you know, I graduated high school and wasn't sure what my path should be beyond high school. I didn't have any funds for education, and so I was blessed that I went to work at an ice cream store in Laurel, Mississippi, Swenson's, and it was owned by an OBGYN. And I worked there probably 3 or 4 months. I was one of their top performers. I could make about $100 on Saturday in tips. Crazy for back in the 80s, right? In ice cream shop. But anyway, he hired me in his practice. After about 3 months of being in the restaurant, he goes, "No, I want you to come to work at my clinic." And so I went to work at his clinic, and he took me to the OR with him. And I was fascinated by the operating room.
And how old were you when?
I was 16 because this was before I graduated that I worked at Swenson's. I think we could only work if we were 17, and I had a best friend that worked there that was 17, and they never asked me my age. So I was 16 when I started working at the ice cream place and then went to work at the clinic. Took me to the OR, and I became fascinated with the OR, and then realized I could do a program for 1 year as a surgical tech in Jackson. So right after high school, I moved here and did the 1 year program at Hines. And then when I completed that, I started my prerequisites for nursing and just took off from there.
Were you working as an OR tech?
Yeah, so I was hired as an OR tech. Graduation was August, and I was hired in April before graduation to work with an orthopedic group. And so I got my feet wet in orthopedics doing total joint replacements, which was awesome. And then continued on education at night, getting my prerequisites for nursing, and then landed myself in nursing school at UMC. Completed that and then went on and did my graduate program at Southern.
So how did you make the transition from a more traditional medical approach to the functional medical approach that you work in today?
So, I've always been an athlete. So I've always been fascinated with wellness, right? I just had a wellness mindset at a very early age, but it was all related to fitness. It was all related to what could I make my body do? And so I was a marathon runner, but my nutrition suffered greatly.
I guess I'm a child of the 80s and 90s also, and I was an athlete, played baseball in college, and it's just not something that we talked about. Beyond a pregame meal, it really didn't matter how you fueled your body, but it just seems like the general public is more educated now, and that it is more mainstream for there to be these customized diets for fueling athletes and then everyday people like me and you.
Right. So absolutely. I had one nutrition course in my pre-nursing education. And then I had maybe one course in my graduate program for nutrition, but it was all based around macronutrients like carbs, proteins, and fats, and, moderation, don't eat too much. Right. But it wasn't really targeted on micronutrients. Really, how does the body biotransform what you're eating into a usable form of ATP and energy? We didn't learn any of that in my primary education. And so I stumbled upon nutrition. Actually, Dr. Doug Odom, that we were talking about earlier as my collaborator back in the day, he introduced a concept to me, fruits and vegetables in a capsule, kind of Jetson food back in the day.
Jetson food, meaning the Jetsons, the cartoon.
Yeah, the cartoon Jetsons.
We've got our law clerk listening in. He's like, what are they talking about?
What are they talking about? Yeah. So the wave of the future that we're living now, all this virtual stuff, if you go back and watch the Jetson episodes, it was all about it.
They had iPhones way back then.
Absolutely, they did.
Just like we do today.
And they had Jetson food. So the Jetson food that Dr. Odom introduced me to was actually a fruit and vegetable extract. And I became fascinated with the concept of whole food nutrition in a capsule, right? It's easy. You can just take it. No need to, just eat my brownie and take my capsule. That was what I thought I could do,
Sure.
right? So I did that for a while, but then I started digging into the research behind. And I realized that those little capsules, dehydrated fruits and vegetables and berries, could change gene expression. They could alter levels of inflammation. They could decrease oxidative stress. And I thought, wow, if a capsule can do that, what could food really do? And so I went back and got a second master's degree in metabolic and nutritional medicine from the University of South Florida Medical School. And what I learned there just transformed my practice completely, because I felt like at that point, not to implement a food-first approach was malpractice. Once you learn actually what the power of food has the ability to do, how could you not teach that?
So when is it that you went to the South Florida Medical School?
So I finished that program in 2012.
Okay. But you've been doing functional medicine for much longer than that.
Since 2004.
Okay.
So from 2004 until I completed that master's program in 2012, there was a lot of independent study. So I was buying conferences to go to, and the company that makes that fruit and vegetable extract actually had twice a year, they would have a nutrition-specific conference where they dug into the nutrition, all the new research coming out on nutrition. And that's what got my appetite wet in the beginning. And then I realized there was so much more, and there was a formal way to get educated on nutrition.
Right. You were informally educated.
Yes,
yourself.
absolutely. Yeah.
In your practice, what type of correlation do you see with people's diets and the effect on their mood, their stress, depression, things of that nature?
I would say 80% of the dysfunction that we experience as people, the headaches, fatigue, GI symptoms, the feel like crap syndrome, is related directly to what we eat. It's huge, and it's so underestimated by most people. They don't really correlate. They don't really pay attention to how I feel when I eat certain foods.
Let's talk about the person who first is introduced to your practice and to the educational materials that you guys provide for your clients, because I know that the people that we see are they're in real crisis. Their world is upside down, and they're looking for a new beginning. And whether that new beginning is in the relationship that they're in, or whether that new beginning means that they've got to walk away from a relationship through a divorce. But I imagine that you experience something similar in your practice, that people are they're in a bad spot and they're wanting to be in a better place. And so talk about your clients and the type of common things that you hear from someone in your initial interaction.
You're absolutely right. And it breaks my heart that people do wait so long before they seek care. And I've been doing this for a very long time, since 2004. And so at this point in my career, I typically do see kind of the worst of the worst. I get a lot of referrals from other providers that they've tried other things that just aren't working and they need a different approach. And so a lot of times they'll come to me and they feel like they've tried everything. They may feel like, gosh, I've done the keto diet, I've done intermittent fasting, I've done this, I've done that, and nothing really moved the needle too much. And so we have to really take a step back and look at them metabolically. So we do rely heavily on lab testing, specific blood testing and biomarkers that can tell us where someone is from a metabolic standpoint and give us guidance on what's going to help move the needle the most for them and get them the best result.
Yeah, because you hear about a lot of, and this probably is not the right word, but fad type diets and get well quick type schemes. I mean, we're marketed to constantly for some nutrition drink or some workout routine. I haven't thought about this in years, but I can remember being back at Mississippi State in an economics class back in the early to mid 90s. And the marketing professor was talking about, all right, what's the new thing? And it was really all about lifestyle and diet. It wasn't the old-fashioned red Coke. It was a Diet Coke. And so just even health and wellness beginning in the 90s. But a lot of times there's a fad associated with it. But food is not a fad. I mean, people have been eating great food for as long as we've had people.
Right. So what we do with food is the fad, right? I can remember back in the 80s, it was T-Factor diet. It was all the low fat. And you saw these new low-fat products hit the market. And as a result of that, people that were eating that way back in the 80s, which that's my age group, have a lot of trans fat deposits in their cell membranes. And so a lot of times hormones don't work well because there's trans fat still sitting there. Those things sit on the cell membrane wall for years and years and years unless we do something deliberate to clear them off. So yeah, everything from the T-Factor diet was extremely low fat. And now we have the keto diet where everybody's eating high amounts of fats. And a lot of times those fats are very inflammatory fats. They're not paying attention to the quality of fats. And so that can get them into trouble very similarly as much as the low fat diet did.
Well, let's talk about just what's the average person. What are they complaining of? I mean, I can tell you what I complain of would be low energy and stressed out and burning the candle at both ends. I mean, we're coming out of the season of social distancing and everybody sheltering at home. And we're now, the
COVID-15.
Yeah, right. And the weight gain associated with that. But it's been the world slowed down for a season while that was going on. But it seems like just slowly but surely things are picking up and the pace of life is beginning to pick up. And so what are you typically seeing with folks when what are they complaining of, for lack of a better word?
So a typical person coming into my door, the number one complaint is fatigue. The number two complaint is unwanted weight gain. And a lot of these people are working really hard trying to change their body composition without success. Lack of sleep, sexual dysfunction of some sort, which, I think of sexual function as kind of the barometer to the overall health picture. So when things start changing there, that's a sign that some other things are really going on, inflammatory states, lack of hormone balance, and that kind of thing. And all of that, in my opinion, is a result of being overfed and undernourished, sleep deprived, and overscheduled. If we had to boil it down to lifestyle behaviors that kind of land us to a place of lack of vitality and fatigue and, inability to perform the way that we want to perform.
So where do you start?
Yeah.
What's the starting point?
The starting point is really sitting down with them and having a really honest conversation about, what it is that they've been doing, how are they feeling, helping them connect some dots about how they're feeling and what they've been doing so that they can begin to understand that. We try to take them on a journey, or join them on their journey wherever they are so that they can understand how much power and control they actually do have to change their physiology. So that's the beginning. And then, like I said, we rely heavily on testing. So I have them collect a set of biomarkers, lab tests, blood tests, sometimes stool cultures, and salivary testing as well, looking at hormone levels. And with that information, we can direct a plan of care that will give them some results.
How long does it take for somebody to, get a good idea of where they are and what they need to do in order to improve?
Yeah, so we start making changes with that very first visit as far as nutrition. But it takes about 3 weeks to get labs back. And at that lab visit, we go over all of those labs in great detail and help them understand where they are so that they can make wise decisions. And I don't dictate the changes they make. I lay it out for them and they have to embrace it. It's up to them to make the decisions of what they're willing and able to do from a lifestyle perspective. Some people, it's a matter of tweaking. They've been working really hard in the fitness space, but they haven't been paying attention to their nutrition. And that's where we have to focus. For some of them, it's clearing the slate and starting over. Like, let's detox your pantry. Let's detox your relationships. Let's set some clear boundaries and move forward. So it really depends on where they are and what they're wanting to accomplish. I'm very goal directed, so I want to know what their goals are.
Hi, I'm Kaylin Dunnels. I'm an attorney here at R+E. Thanks for listening to Season 2 of our podcast. I hope you are finding these stories insightful and comforting. If you relate to what you have heard so far, or if you want more information, give us a call and request a consultation with one of our attorneys. You can also request a consultation right from our website by completing a simple online form. Family law is all we do. As experts, we have the information and advice you need before you move forward, whatever moving forward looks like for you. We would love to be in your corner, but until then, sit back, relax, and enjoy part 2 of today's show.
Obviously, or as one might expect, in our practice, we see a lot of people that are in distress, and usually they are looking to find something to help sort of self-medicate their problems at the moment, whether that be food or alcohol, drugs, whether pharmaceutical and illegal. What effect does that self-medicating process have on your body?
Yeah, so I'll say my drug of choice when I was going through difficult times was running. And even something as simple as running in excess can have, negative effect. I was running and then eating whatever I wanted. Like I said, I would have brownies and ice cream for dinner because I wasn't overweight, right? So my mindset was I could do that. And just like with anyone using a substance to ease their pain, they think they're doing themselves good in the beginning. And then it becomes, more of a habit and more of an addiction, which I don't typically deal with in my practice. I usually refer that out to counselors and things like that. Let's get that settled before we start making any drastic changes. But there's a price to pay for all of it. There's the body is going to try to reach a state of balance any way that it can. It robs Peter to pay Paul. But at some point, you reach that tipping point.
Right.
Where there's no return. You can't back up and do what you did before and have it work because you've depleted your metabolic reserves.
Well, I think that, I'm thinking of a mom who's in a difficult marital relationship and their husband might be working all the time and maybe they're a stay-at-home mom and they're taking care of 3 kids. And it just seems like an almost insurmountable task for them to make these types of lifestyle changes. It seems like it would be somewhat overwhelming for someone in that particular position. How do you baby step someone into a more healthy lifestyle?
Right. So we ask, how fast do you want to go? Do you want to go slower? Do you want to go fast? You get better results if you go fast, obviously, faster results. But there's nothing wrong with making slow changes, especially if we're not in a crisis mode. And if we could just start one, adding in the good. We oftentimes, when we think about lifestyle change, we think about what we have to stop doing. And that just seems impossible. And so sometimes it's adding in the good stuff. So adding in a good wholesome breakfast, and that may be the first place to start. It's adding in some good whole food nutrition to start the day. Carving out some quiet time so you have time to think and process and you don't feel so overwhelmed all the time. Because in that situation, when you're essentially a single mom, dad's working, but he's not able to participate in the childcare, and you've got 3 kids all the time, it can be very stressful and overwhelming. And having some time to kind of sit and process, I think is super important when you're trying to make change.
Yeah, I had someone mention to us that, taking a good brisk 30-minute walk can have the same effect as maybe taking a Xanax.
Absolutely. If you could bottle up every benefit of exercise and put it into a capsule, you couldn't keep it on the shelf. I mean, it just does so many things for the body. So yeah, a good 30-minute walk, stretching your legs and letting your mind wander is great medicine.
I've heard you talk about this idea of starting with food, air, water, and movement. Speak to our listeners about that.
Yeah, so as Americans, we're exposed to a lot of toxicants, a lot of things in our environment that have the ability to kind of clog up our pathways for good hormone balance. And when you talk about fatigue and you talk about insomnia, those are a result of hormones are just not working well. So when we talk about putting together a concept that people can really grasp onto and take action on, clean air. So air filters are kind of a great concept to have in the house, in the bedroom. Not having carpet in the house if you can avoid are great ways to accomplish clean air. Clean water, so water filters are great. In our clinic, we use the Berkey.
Yeah, I've got one, actually. My mother-in-law gave us one.
Yeah, so the Berkeys are great, inexpensive ways to do filtered water. A lot of people are walking around with water bottles, and I'm not against water bottles. Obviously, when we're out and about, we have to grab a water bottle every now and then. But some people drink bottled water exclusively. That's all they drink. And as a result of that, they're getting a lot of phytoestrogens. They're getting a lot of estrogen content right there in that plastic bottle that they're drinking all day long. And they wonder why their hormones don't work well. So if we can clean up the air, we can clean up the water, and then we can start cleaning up the food, then we've done a really good thing to help patients. And then adding movement in, like you talked about, that 30-minute brisk walk. Those are just foundational things that really anybody can do. And I think if we ask ourselves the question, we could all be doing better, right? There's always something we can tweak and do better in that realm. So just keeping that in the forefront of decision making.
Let's imagine for a moment that you're sitting in on an initial consultation with me and Matt, and we're talking to a dad. And the dad he gets up in the morning, he goes to work, he spends 8.5 hours in a stressful job, and then he comes home to his wife and his 3 kids, and for whatever reason, things aren't working. He's stressed out. He can't sleep. Maybe he's drinking too much in the evenings to unwind. He feels like he has no time for himself. What's going on with his body? And I know what's going on with his legal situation, but what's going on with that individual as a person from a health standpoint?
So when I hear that story, it's a very common story, actually. I think the first thing that my mind goes to is how inflamed is that person?
Yeah, what do you mean by that? Because that was one of the things I wanted to ask you about, is this idea of inflammation and how it affects our overall wellness and health.
Yeah. So as I mentioned a little bit ago, as we walk through life, we're exposed to a lot of toxicants that bioaccumulate. And so if we're leading that typical American lifestyle where we are, overscheduled and we're not paying attention to our nutrition, we're not staying hydrated, we're not getting movement, then those bioaccumulate more. There's no way for them to leave the body. And so as they bioaccumulate, as I mentioned before, you can get to a tipping point where that bioaccumulation becomes a symptom. And fatigue is typically a symptom. Fatigue leads to irritability. So with irritability, you're not relating well to your spouse or your children, and probably not to your coworkers either. And that just creates that whole cascade of stress. So really thinking about, okay, how can we walk him from where he is and asking him, okay, are you comfortable here? Is this working out for you?
Yeah, the answer to that is going to be no.
Okay. So then
Every time.
What are you willing to do to change, right? Because some of them are not willing to give up their alcohol, right? They're not there yet. Some of them are, but alcohol is a really big inflammagen.
I feel like you're looking at me too deeply when you say that. So we might have had a glass or two of red wine often during
COVID.
Oh gosh, are you kidding?
Yeah.
It's 6:00. There's nothing to do.
Right.
But there's a great bottle of wine that we haven't tried yet.
But when you say inflammation, how is that manifesting itself inside somebody's body? What specifically is inflamed?
So I'll start by saying that the two most common sources of physiological inflammation that are unrecognized, because I think that's the easiest place to start. One is dental issues. So not paying attention to dental hygiene, having bleeding gums and things like that. That's a source of internal inflammation that no matter what you're doing well, that's going to keep things stirred up. The other source is gut inflammation. And a lot of times the oral inflammation leads to gut inflammation. So it's kind of one of those things that no one really thinks to look at. So you have that source of inflammation brewing, and it'll show up as hormone disturbance. When a cell is inflamed, you can't get hormones intracellular very easily. So you could be producing testosterone just fine, but it's not getting intracellular. You could be producing your thyroid hormone or your stress hormones just fine, but it's not going to get intracellular so that you have the positive benefit of it. So inflammation blocks intracellular uptake of nutrients and hormones.
So would that mean somebody that's experiencing that, you could test their testosterone and it might show that they're producing, adequate amounts, but their body's not utilizing it or absorbing it the way it's supposed to?
Absolutely. So they may clinically look like they're low testosterone. But when you really get down to the root of it, it's actually inflammation. And that's the fun thing that I get to do, is really say, okay, yes, you could go on testosterone to help with your symptoms, but let's clean up your inflammation first and see what happens. And the body responds and starts producing on its own.
So alcohol is a culprit.
It could be a culprit. I'm not against red wine. I think it's great. I drink red wine myself.
Thank you for saying that.
But it can, in excess, right? It can be a culprit. And what else are you putting